Hello,
Hi,
I'm Alex.
I'm Val, and we're recording a special episode today.
We're going to try something new.
This podcast, we had a vague idea what it was going to be like when we first started it, but it's kind of just changing as we go along. And after watching this season, we were talking and realized that it might be interesting to kind of talk about the seasons as a whole once they're done. Because definitely, like, we go into the minutia of the individual episodes and the things that are kind of unique to them, but we try not to jump too much forward when we're talking about them. So it is kind of nice to look at a season then as a whole. And I don't know, I wish we had done this now for season 1 and season 2.
We can always go back.
Maybe one day we'll go back. I feel like we would have to watch the seasons all over again.
I'm sure we will.
Which I'm sure we'll do at some point. But I think going forward, I'd like to try to pay attention to some of these connections over the whole season and talk about them.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. I was kind of thinking, like, the way that I was envisioning it, like, to be able to talk about certain character arcs and like where characters started off and where characters ended up. To talk about kind of like how the mood of the season shifts and turns and like some of like the bigger ideas that the season deals with as a whole.
Yeah.
And then maybe that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see where that takes us. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think there are definitely some kind of key players in this season. So I mean, maybe we could kind of discuss them. I mean, obviously Tony is always kind of at the center of every season. So just thinking about kind of like where he starts in the season and where he ends up. So, I mean, in the first episode, we have the FBI kind of tracing his moves and kind of having this threat of putting in a surveillance system in the lamp in his house. Right. So he obviously has a threat coming from there, and I feel like he has a threat coming from a lot of different places at the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. We have Patsy actually coming with the potential of killing him.
Right.
At this point, his mom is still alive.
Right.
And
she, like we end the season before with her, not telling information, right?
Well, there's like another threat actually from Livia with the FBI because they want her to testify against him.
Yeah.
So he's in a bit of a precarious situation, but he doesn't even know it. Yeah. None of these things he knows.
He's just gained a bunch of power, right? Like, he is, that happened a while ago, but he is, since Junior's sick, he's the head of the mob, ostensibly. Also kind of, I guess, like neutralized a threat in Pussy, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So he's kind of, there are these threats, but he is kind of on a high. And then he experiences this really deep thing, which is his mother dying. He deals with it in a pretty Tony way. We don't see all the time, like, the depth of how that's impacted him.
Right.
But we do kind of come to a bit of a conclusion on that throughout the course of the season. So I don't know, like, yeah. Mm-hmm. By the end of the season, we have him, whereas he wasn't really able to deal with the impact that the threat his mother was to him, or the impact that her mothering had on him throughout his life.
Yeah.
He was really, in his sessions with Melfi, he was really, really hesitant to discuss that at all or acknowledge that at all. And after his relationship with Gloria, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit too, he's actually able to come to terms with who exactly his mother was and to kind of like see the, the depth of the destruction that she was capable of by being able to see it through another person.
Yeah, and I think that those things are even kind of related, like his mother dying and him seeking out Gloria could even have a relationship. Like he's seeking out a character who kind of like fills the void of who his mother was for him.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of discovers things about himself through realizing that Gloria is like kind of a substitute for Livia.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because like his mood throughout the season, he describes it himself, like he's happy, like she makes him happy at first. And it is this maybe like familiarity or I don't know, excitement, I guess, like crazy.
Or just
crazy
like a shallow
are.
draw, like he's just like drawn to like.
Yeah, she has nice legs and she's Italian.
She's Italian.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. He really like, I don't know. We see him in some quite sweet moments. Like we see him grappling with Meadow, not being upset with him over the Noah Tenenbaum situation, right? So he like, and that clearly impacts him. He doesn't really deal with it in any kind of productive way, but it definitely has an impact. We see him buy Carmela some expensive jewelry.
Yeah, I feel like Tony kind of goes through like an array of emotions and moods throughout the season. Like it's actually a little bit all over the place. Like he's very angry at times. He also feels happy at times. I mean, I guess it's human to feel that he would have these different emotions, but it is like rather extreme actually. It's kind of like alternating from poles or something, or like extreme emotions are kind of like swinging in a semi-unstable way, I feel, throughout the season.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel him more, I'm trying to think of, it's hard to do this, by the way. I'm trying to think of times where he was like really angry. And of course there were times like that, but I feel like a lot of it was like in protection of like protecting or like trying to protect Tracy, or being really upset about what happened to Tracy, or trying to be protective of Meadow with the stuff with Jackie Jr. I don't know, like there's more of it's an emotional reaction to these things that are coming up, but they're more tied into like very human concerns, or like concerns for people, rather than just being like angry for no reason.
Right, of course, yeah.
Or just like mean for no reason, right?
Yeah.
Which we've seen him be before. I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, but
yeah.
We also then, by the end of, and you brought it up for the beginning of the season, right? We have the FBI, who's this really large threat. They've infiltrated the house. We have that great like spy kind of episode.
Yeah.
We have the FBI spying on all sorts of characters, right? In order to get the lamp placed in the basement. They're spying on Carmela and Adriana at their tennis lesson. They're spying on Meadow, who's newly at college and meeting her roommate. We'll talk about Meadow also. But by the end of the season, it's interesting because we see the FBI watching Carmela and Adriana at this tennis lesson. By the end of the season, it's Adriana who's actually potentially a really big threat.
Right. And it's interesting because like I feel like Tony kind of neutralizes all the threats that exist to him at the beginning of the season, but then where they leave the season is establishing a new threat, actually coming from kind of the same player, the FBI. But there's kind of this arc of we're nervous for Tony, and we feel like a lot of bad things could happen to him from multiple actors, and then they're all kind of dealt with in the course of the season, and then they set up season 4 saying, well, now there's something new. And I think that's kind of something central to the show, is that a character like Tony, or all the people in the mob, are constantly going to be having threats from all sorts of different directions. And even if they can neutralize them, there's always going to be a new one.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I like that it's Meadow who neutralizes the original FBI threat.
Right. Yeah. She didn't even know what she was doing.
Like, they didn't even know about it.
Yeah. So what about Meadow in terms of the season?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot happens to her.
A lot. I mean,
it's pretty...
It's so weird to like think about the beginning of this season being Mr. Roger's neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's why this is maybe like a useful exercise, because we see her like just leaving for college, meeting her new crazy roommate, getting, in the second episode, I think, right, getting into her relationship with Noah Tenenbaum. That being, her grappling with her parents' reactions to that and stuff like that as the season goes on, grappling with the mental health of her roommate.
Yeah.
Coming to terms with a lot of things about her parents' relationship, like as she kind of like learns more about the world, and reads, really academic kind of books about, I don't know, the social contract or whatever.
Social compact, I think, as they said. And then we didn't know that term. So I think in an episode we thought maybe that was like a mistake, a malapropism or whatever. But then upon some further reading, I think it's cool. I think people just say that here.
Yeah, anyways, I'll Canadian. Still say the social contract. Yeah, we are very sorry. But, she confronts them on these things. She confronts Tony on his racism. She confronts Carmela on her kind of hypocrisy in her relationship. Which is kind of new. It's very new for Meadow to be that kind of voice of a certain, I don't know, like, I don't know, the space that she gained by going through college, I think going to Columbia allowed her some insight.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's maturing. She's becoming an adult. Yeah. And the central question for her is, like, how far will she land away from the family? Yeah. Or will she be drawn back into the orbit?
And we at first see her kind of go, like, really far afield, right? Yeah. With Noah Tenenbaum. Like, that's, like, the opposite of anyone in her life and in the Sopranos family. And then, you know, based on, you know, a lot of factors, based on him being a total dickwad and based on Tony being a huge racist, she kind of does swing back towards something that's very, very close to where she came from.
Again, kind of like an extreme swing. Yeah, to these, like, opposite poles.
When she gets together with Jackie Jr. And it's kind of reactionary in a lot of ways, right? Yeah. Like, in all kinds of senses, like personality type and background and the work they're involved in and what her parents think of them and all these kind of things. But then we see her at the end of this season.
Well, she's gone through a lot. Like, in terms of, if we compare Meadow at the end of season 3 to the beginning of season 3, I mean, she's a completely different person because she's been put through some very traumatic events.
Yeah. We see her, like, kind of becoming a little bit more childlike at the end, right? When she's at the wake, right, or at the funeral after party.
Yeah.
And she's throwing bread at Junior.
Yeah.
Right, and she's getting wasted and singing.
Well, and running away from the family.
One more time, and running away. Yeah, like so.
So actually, at the beginning, we actually have her, like, coming home a lot to do laundry, and she is kind of like a child. And then by the end, she actually kind of has some agency and actually, like, running away from the family event.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, you know, I forget exactly where we start back off with Meadow in season 4. But...
Tune in for our next episode.
Yeah.
Which we'll be recording later tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else about Meadow you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that's kind of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that she goes through a lot, and by the end of the season, she's a much more adult character, and she has, like, a pretty significant arc that happens in season 3.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Well, it's a significant time in her life, right? Like, and...
Well, especially when your boyfriend gets murdered.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah.
But also just, like, like that first bit of freedom that she's having from the family and how she responds to it and how that affects her emotionally. And we don't even, I mean, it's like just after Christmas when the season ends, right?
Yeah.
So that's only her first semester of college, right? That's a pretty extraordinary short amount of things to fit into that short amount of time.
That's an interesting thing about this season too, is how clearly they delineate time.
Yeah. The other character that I mean, there's a couple other. Melfi and Carmela were the two other ones that I was really interested in talking about. And I know we have a few others probably that we want to touch on too. In terms of Melfi, I don't have a ton to say about it, but, you know, we definitely get, like, a very key Melfi episode in this season with Employee of the Month.
Yeah.
But we kind of see her go from, you know, like, before the start of season 3, she's taken back Tony as a client. She's, like, dealt with, you know, that kind of responsibility that she feels for him. And I think she's kind of comes to terms at that point that she's, like, not really that responsible for Tony, right? Yeah. We have her having those dreams about the car crash and things like that she's grappling with. And then of course but like in her sessions with Tony, we kind of see her being the same old, like she's not really pushing Tony at all. She's kind of, you know, still letting him say the things he says and not really challenging him. And then we have Employee of the Month where she experiences the rape and, you know, and coming out of that too, and, you know, grappling with her own family and her son and her ex-husband / current boyfriend, Richard LaPena. And I think, she, you know, feels like she needs protection from Tony. She, like, which I don't think she really has ever felt before, right? She's been scared of Tony.
Yeah.
But I don't think she really ever saw him before as this protective figure. She chooses not to utilize that and makes that choice. And we see, like, a lot of her sessions, you know, grappling with that choice. But then we see her after that, I think, like, start to challenge Tony. Like, she starts to work with Tony and Carmela, which was an interesting choice. Like, that just kind of pops up after that.
Yeah.
And so maybe because of that, she sees Tony better. I'm not sure. But she starts to challenge him a little bit more. But she starts to challenge him more around the time of his relationship with Gloria. And we know that they would never have met if it hadn't been for Melfi's mistake. I do question, like, if subconsciously she made that mistake on purpose.
Right.
That, like, because as it turns out, like we said, like, the character of Gloria was really useful for Tony, right? To kind of understand the type of people that he draws into his life and this, like, archetype of his mom.
Yeah.
And that's when we do see Melfi start to, like, really challenge him on some of his thought patterns and stuff like that. So, I don't know. So that's interesting. She, you know, we do see her kind of fade a little bit into the background in the seasons to come. She's not as big of a character.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Employee of the Month is, like, the apex of Melfi's arc.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of kind of, like, rising action up until that point, and then the last moment of that episode when she says no and decides to not call on Tony is, like, a definitive moment for her where she starts to actually be pulled away from his orbit. Up until that point, I feel like she's completely entangled in everything that surrounds Tony, and I think it's actually kind of bringing her down. But I think that for the rest of the show, she's actually kind of, like, made this definitive split, and now that she's kind of outside of it, I feel like she actually does challenge Tony more, and she's less concerned and kind of brought down by everything that Tony does.
Right.
And I think that she's actually kind of like a less central character to the whole show after that point.
Yeah.
I feel that she kind of almost fades away.
Yeah.
Because she's actually consciously made that split from Tony, which is something that almost nobody does in the whole show.
Yeah.
And so I feel like as an audience, we can kind of respect that and see that she did something with some integrity, which is definitely a rarity in Sopranos world. But it also makes her less kind of tied up in all the drama that's happening.
Well, interestingly, like, we start to hear Tony say things like, it's the therapy, it's really working. Like, he says that a bunch of times throughout this season, right?
Yeah.
Like, and his mood is different, right? He becomes this kind of, like, when he's with Gloria, this kind of, like, happy wanderer type.
Right.
For a bit. For a second. But I think, you know, if, like, the one thing that Tony was going to get out of therapy was recognizing who his mother was, then she did kind of, like, accomplish her goals.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to see her, like, do something different with Tony, because she really was just, like, doing the same stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
And not really pushing him, so.
Yeah, and I feel like her demeanor even changes. Like, you can kind of see it. Like,
yeah.
The therapy sessions have kind of a different tone to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, like, she, you know, she did look to Tony for that, like I said, like, that protective creature, the dog in the dream, you know. But then I think, you know, did come to terms with that, like, that's not who is there to protect her, and that she's powerful. I don't know, by the end of the season, she comes across as very powerful to me.
And I think she's starting to see Tony for who he really is.
Yeah, and maybe, like I said, maybe that's part of, like, having Carmela there. I'm not sure, but yeah,
interesting. I mean, I think also, like, what happens in this season is characters like Carmela and Melfi, like, we get to see their therapy sessions. I feel like they're really deepening the characters outside of Tony. Like, the ensemble is really honing in on many more people than just Tony Soprano.
Yeah.
And we're starting to, like, fully flesh out characters.
Yeah.
And really have an idea of their psychology, which is something that the show didn't really get into until this point.
Yeah. Well, we had seen some Melfi sessions before, but we definitely hadn't seen Carmela sessions.
No.
And so I guess, like, Carmela, for me, this season also has a really interesting arc and development. You know, she, in a lot of ways, is almost in crisis, right? Like, Meadows left the home, which is kind of disorienting or, you know, really challenging for her to not have that level of control over the thing that is her thing, right? Which is the home and the kids, right? Like, she's a homemaker, right?
Yeah.
It must be a very nice home. That's what she does. And so, like, she no longer has Meadow there. And then, like we talked about earlier, like, she also does have Meadow challenging her on some things that, you know, she never really felt challenged by Meadow on before.
Yeah.
Like the nature of her and Tony's relationship. And she's also, and so, like, with those, you know, challenges from Meadow, and then also, you know, some other things that happen in the season, like Tony buying her expensive jewelry, and having her suspicions and going to her own psychotherapy, right? Like, she's really grappling with these issues of, like, what's her motivation in this relationship, right? And how do I say it? Like, how does she kind of reconcile the quid pro quo, or I don't know what kind of word I'm looking for, but, like, how does she reconcile this, like, exchange of goods, I guess you could call it, between her and Tony, and you know, does her gain justify the cost? And the cost of it is, you know, people and people's lives, and and she sees that and she knows that, but she still makes the choice to continue in that exchange, right? I think her session with Krakower, is that him, is one of the best Carmela moments in this season. You know, we see her seek out, we see her, like, go to a lot of people for support. We see her go to Father Phil, not this season. But in past seasons, we see her kind of seek out that, although she goes to that other priest. This season. I don't know where Father Phil is this season. I don't know what happened to him.
Well, I think she's investigating, like, other avenues. And actually, that other priest gives her, like, very convenient advice.
Well, they all do.
Even more than Father Phil. I mean, it's really, catering
and
to.
He's looking at her rings and stuff like that. But, you know, and then she goes to Melfi on her own and is, like, seeking, you know, something from Melfi, and she gets referred to Krakower. She goes to her mob wife friends. She goes to, in some ways, for Meadow. Like, she actually asks Meadow that one time, being like, okay, tell me what you think about your dad and I. Right? And then we see her also make this shift into, becoming herself, or taking a step back from her reliance on Tony by getting that real estate book. She doesn't, like, actually fully make moves at this point, but it is kind of like, it is kind of foreshadowing for her, kind of, making some moves to have some more autonomy. I don't know if she, like, knows that she's hypocritical or not. Like, I don't know if she would, like, identify herself as that. Like, she's definitely grappling with issues. Like, it's interesting with Meadow, right? Because, like, Carmela comes out and you know, in a very passive-aggressive way, passes commentary on both of Meadow's relationships this season. Right? But, like, fails to kind of critique heavily her own. Or she's working on it. She, you know, she's suspicious of Tony still all the time. That's something she lives with all the time. She never finds out about Gloria. Although she questions, like, what's going on. Because she receives big jewelry. I don't know. It's really interesting where we're left.
I mean, I think throughout the course of the season 2, one important thing for Carmela is her assessing and reflecting on Meadow's relationships, like with Noah Tenenbaum and Jackie Jr., and being unhappy with both of them, even though they're so different in different ways. Like, there's some complexity to that. Like, her dealing with Meadow being with Jackie Jr., at first it seems like, well, that's great, he's coming closer to home, but then realizing that probably isn't what she actually wants for her daughter.
No, it's interesting. It's really, and seeing herself in Meadow, but then seeing Meadow as someone other than herself too, you know? And AJ, right? Like, so, like, AJ is the other, I mean, he doesn't have too many things that go on for him, but
there's a couple interesting ones, though.
But she is, by the end of the season, like, really consumed with AJ and trying to find the right thing for him, right? So,
and that's actually kind of provoking a split between her and Tony. Like, a pretty major one. They have a very different philosophy about what
parenting.
AJ should be doing in parenting. Which is also kind of setting up some drama in subsequent seasons in terms of, like, their split and disagreements within the family, and kind of focusing more on that. Because I feel like, in general, this season actually, even though it did kind of flirt with some major mob drama events, like in the beginning, like the Garbage Wars and the Esplanade and stuff, at the end of the day, it's kind of an introspective season.
Totally.
And I think that the things that are really examined are these interpersonal relationships and family ties and
totally
and all those things.
Yeah. Who else did you want to?
Well, what about, I mean, AJ, just briefly,
Yeah,
one thing
sure.
that I thought was really interesting about him is that they established that he also has panic attacks in episode 3 on the football field.
Right.
And so when you think about kind of like where he starts, that's a pretty major event that they kind of introduce that. And then at the end of the season in episode 13, he has another panic attack, which means that his family finds out because it happens in front of them.
Right.
It had been held back from them. And that means that he can't go to military school.
Right.
So, and actually, AJ does have quite an arc in this season. I mean, he
hangs
gets
out
kicked
with
out
Lady
of school.
Gaga.
He hangs out with Lady Gaga. He gets kicked out of his school.
Yeah.
Almost like twice, really.
Yeah.
Like he's suspended and then he's expelled.
And then he's kicked out. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's kind of on this like ne'er-do-well path.
Yeah, and we see him reflected in Jackie Jr.
Yeah. And there's definitely a tie between AJ and Jackie Jr.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting considering what happens to Jackie Jr., which is a pretty excellent segue to talk about him.
Sure. So this is basically like, all of Jackie Jr. happens in this season.
Yeah, it's pretty much
I
a
think
complete arc.
we see him once before season 3.
We do see him like in passing. It's almost like weird to see those scenes after you've seen the whole show earlier on because
he's just
he actually almost has a different personality or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he doesn't. Like, it's expanded in this season, but it's just so much more detailed.
Maybe
in
they didn't know
season
what
3.
they were going to do with Jackie Jr. in the beginning either.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of get that feeling.
Yeah.
But he still has this kind of like hot-headed, trying to be ahead of where he actually is.
Yeah.
Combative, trying to kind of posture in the mob attitude, even before season 3. In the few scenes where we do see him.
Well, we have him now, like, I guess, like, the thing different about this season is he actually has a better access point, right? Like, through Ralphie.
Yeah.
Like, of course, he always had, like, his name, right? And, like, but, we don't really meet him before Jackie Sr. dies, right? Like, so he never, was able, and he was young at that point. Mm-hmm. He never really had access to it. And now through Ralphie, who just doesn't give a crap about anybody, kind of allows him to, introduces him to some of the mob people and gets him a gun and sets him up with these jobs that don't go well and these ideas, to be part of his crew and stuff like that. But then we see, we see him have this relationship with Meadow. I don't really know what his motivations were really behind that. I know they do have some family history and stuff like that, but I can't help but see it also as kind of a power play of some sort too.
On some level, yeah. I think so. That's part of it.
But we see him really try and fail at almost every turn in everything that he tries to do.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, he does have some semi-endearing moments where he's with Meadow and you kind of, I mean, it's hard to know even if there's any
honesty in it.
Honesty behind it, you know, like when Meadow crashes the car or whatever.
Yeah.
They do kind of humanize him, but at the end of the day, he's just such a jackass.
Yeah.
But
and then he meets Omar.
Yeah, at the very end, yeah. But it's interesting, that his entire arc does take place through season 3, and it does kind of show you what is the path of kind of a mob, somebody who's both a mob insider and outsider kind of at the same time. He has this connection, but he's from a younger generation. And even though he has an access point through Ralph, he's really not connected to what's happening, even though he really wants to be.
Yeah.
And everybody just kind of shits on him and doesn't respect him.
Yeah.
And you see somebody kind of trying to break through that, but then just getting completely annihilated as a result.
Yeah.
Interesting too, actually, with Ralphie. I mean, Ralphie's another character who
is
everything we know of, everything we know about him has happened just in season 3. He's introduced here, and it's interesting because I think they really set him up to be a major antagonist and player in season 4.
We see him slowly gaining power over the course of the season.
Yeah, but it's interesting because this season's, and I think we talked about this in one of the episodes, they set up the season, you kind of feel like Ralphie is the new antagonist, which is interesting coming from Richie in season 2 because there's a lot of commonalities between them. So it feels like an extension of that. But season 3 actually kind of breaks down in that Ralphie really isn't the full antagonist of the season.
Yeah.
In fact, like in the beginning, he kind of is, and and you have like University kind of like as an apex of that.
Yeah.
But then it kind of recedes, and we actually have other kind of players come in that are more antagonistic to everybody on the whole.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is interesting. Yeah, it's funny, like it's really weird to look back on a season where a character was just introduced, right? And to like kind of see how much
just
you
feels like
feel
he
like
was
you
always
know
there.
them. Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's complicated. Like, the stuff in University with Tracy is some of the most hard to watch television in the season, and he's like one of the more despicable characters that we meet. But we also see him really like grappling with his insecurities and his desire to be something bigger than he is, and how he deals with that. We see like once he's made captain, we actually do see him almost like breathe a little bit of relief. Like, he's not fucking that up yet.
No.
Too badly.
No, I mean, he's always a good earner.
He's like a good earner. Yeah.
As he likes to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anyone else we wanted to...
Well, I think Adriana's really interesting because if you think about her progression throughout the season, like when it starts off, she's playing tennis with Carmela, but I mean, on the whole, she's actually very disconnected.
Are they engaged yet at that point? When do they get engaged?
Oh, great question.
Oh.
When does that happen? Okay, well, we just came back.
No, it is during this season because then she quits her job at the restaurant.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. We do this after we took a break at the holidays, and then we came back and we're going right into it. So some of the small details
I know
are eluding me right now, but that's okay. You can write us if we've made any huge mistakes.
Yeah.
We've offended you. But what's interesting with Adriana is like at the beginning of the season, she's pretty far from the kind of like center of money and power and drama that's happening around the mob. And then as the season goes on, she's actually really drawn into it.
Well, now she has Crazy Horse.
She has her own club, and I mean, she's actually a target of the FBI.
Right.
So that doesn't really bode well for everybody because she is so much more. She has so much more proximity to the actual kind of comings and goings of the mob family. Especially,
I think especially with her, engagement to Chris and having the club.
Yeah, and if you think about like in the beginning for Christopher as a character, and it's not a major season for him. I mean, even though there is Pine Barrens and you have like that major episode.
I'm so excited for a major Chris season soon.
Yeah, me too. But, what's interesting is like at the beginning of the season, he's not made.
Yeah.
So if you think about his struggles and his desires at the beginning, he's aiming for something that happens in season 3.
Yeah.
And that changes the implications too of where 8 is.
Yeah, totally.
And if you look at her from the beginning to the end, actually, there's a huge difference in terms of where she kind of stands in the hierarchy of the mob and the power that she kind of possesses.
No,
or at least the proximity to power.
Totally. And I mean, just in terms of Chris, like we do start to see him, like after getting made, he still has this part of his personality where he challenges Tony and challenges kind of like how things have always been.
Yeah.
Which is a strong part of his character.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think there's a lot of death in this season.
Yeah, and like illness.
Yeah, death and illness. I mean, we have Livia dying, we have Bobby Sr. dying, we have Tracy dying, we have Jackie Jr. dying.
We have like Junior's cancer, getting a second opinion.
Yeah, we have like Patsy, like a seeming like there's a threat from Patsy of coming to kill Tony. There's a lot of I
mean, there's always a lot of death, but I think a lot of episodes like really focused on the.
There's a lot of it looming over the characters. I think in this season, like a lot of this season is about characters coping with death of various people and. Like potential death. Like, yeah.
Well, I think we see that reflected like even in Pine Barrens too, right? That we're dealing with kind of like the eternal, or we're dealing with like these boundaries between life and death, right? And same with illness. Like in illness, we're also like dealing with these kind of boundaries between life and death. And I think like I might have talked about that with Bobby in Pine Barrens, that he's like a character that is like kind of healthfully deals with death of his father, right? And helps Junior through this illness, which is right on that kind of cusp.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll definitely see more death in the series.
Chances
are.
I
do think there's also like, and we didn't maybe discuss it as much, but like there were a lot of episode titles at least that dealt with like religious aspects, right? Like he is risen to save us all from Satan's power. That's been like more like a stronger theme in some other seasons maybe. But this concept of being saved or being risen, right, is kind of that like, how do, like, what happens when we move from different worlds to the other kind of thing, like,
right.
Quite spiritual.
Yeah. I think the stakes get higher in this season. Like we talked about the kind of like trilogy of violent episodes 4, 5, 6, Employee of the Month, another toothpick in university.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we're kind of brought into the realities of what actually happens in this world and how violent it actually is and what the impact is on a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And how a lot of people, are killed or kind of brought down by...
There's definitely... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah.
No, I was just going to say there's kind of like two arcs in this, or two peaks of the season, really, right? If we're going to look at kind of like the violence, right? We have that one in episodes 4, 5, 6, and then the last two episodes, right? Amor Fu and Army of One. We also have this other kind of peak of violence, but the rest of it is like...
What do we have as violence in the very end?
Well, like Jackie Jr. getting killed. Yeah. The violence of, it's not like killing, but like the violence of Tony against Gloria when she, Yeah. We have these very like dramatic, emotional scenes.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Totally.
But then we have these ones, in like these ones that are dealing with illness, death, like those kind of fall between these really violent peaks, right? It's like, even though we're not dealing with like the violence of death or like the like graphic nature of death, that we're always kind of dealing with it. Even in these kind of like, what's the opposite of a peak? I don't know. A valley, trough. A trough. We're still like grappling with those issues during those times as well.
Yeah.
I think about poor, what's her face?
What's her face?
Oh, shoot.
Who are we talking
about?
Why
am I trying to think? Why can't I remember?
What's her
Jackie
face?
Jr.'s mom.
Oh, Rosalie.
Rosalie, thank you. I had Gloria in my head
her
again.
face?
For some reason, they
kind of look similar.
They look a little bit alike from me or something. I don't know. Yeah. Like, she's now lost everybody, basically. Like, all she has left is Ralphie.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's not good. But, like, we get exposed to her grief. And lots of characters.
Yeah.
Grief. Yeah.
I mean, and grief is definitely a central theme, too, in terms of how do characters deal with Olivia's death.
Yeah. And in some ways, like, it's interesting, like, they don't deal with it the way that I would deal with death, right? Like they deal with it in very unexpected ways. Yeah. And same with illness, right? They deal like everyone has their own way of grappling with illness. Yeah. We have Junior, getting upset with people who are kind of coddling him and treating him gently. Yeah. But like that's how some people, like, that's their reaction to that, right? Yeah. Is to be nurturing and to be kind. Yeah. But he doesn't respond. It's interesting. Yeah. It's just interesting.
One other thing that happens in this season, too, is in episode 3, we have the breakthrough with Melfi of Tony associating the meat with violence. Yeah. Which is interesting because I think that, like, meat starts to... I mean, it's always showing up in this show, but there's actually, like, deliberately, like, a focus on meats in the show. Yeah. For instance, like, when Gloria actually throws the steak at Tony's head, I feel like it's, like, hitting him in the head. It's, like, as obvious as we're going to see, like, a relationship to that epiphany. But, just, like, looking out for that, they formally kind of acknowledge that relationship in this show and that symbolism. Yeah. Which is something that happens in this season and is something to kind of, like, look out for.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. I didn't even think of that.
Pine Barrens College, not college, like Pine Barrens in terms of its relationship to college, university in terms of its relationship to college, like also. These kind of standalone episodes that propel the story forward, that I think is kind of like what Sopranos does best and maybe probably better than anything else that's ever come along. Yeah. There's a lot of... And also, like, Employee of the Month. I feel like they really capitalize on that structure in this season.
A lot of standout episodes in this season.
Yeah, there's a lot of standout episodes. I think a lot of people think of it as one of the top seasons for that reason.
Yeah.
But when you think about those episodes, they kind of have self-contained stories a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And
but in the same way of that, like in the same way that those episodes are standalone, that those I think are also what made me want to look at season 3 as a whole.
Yeah.
Because I've never really been able to determine what my favorite season is.
Yeah, I mean, they're also great.
It's like why bother?
Yeah. I like season 6 of Dexter the best. That's my favorite.
Yeah, and season 6 of Lost, actually. Both.
Oh yeah, just like the end of Lost is probably my favorite season of Sopranos. It's just so much better than everything they do here.
But yeah, no, I don't know. I think this is useful. It's helped me to kind of frame season 3 and then go, like, now we're going to go and watch episode 1 of season 4.
Yeah. So we'll be back with the season recaps for all the subsequent seasons.
Well, let us know. How about this?
Yeah.
You can let us know if this is something that you want to hear about. Or Alex and I could just talk about it by ourselves, not on a podcast.
And the question is, depending on when you're listening to this, will season 1 and 2 have a recap? They won't until we're done, but maybe they will in sometime in the future.
Maybe.
Wow, deep.
I mean,
Layers of time.
It's not that deep.
That's true. That's not deep at all.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening. Hope you had a good holiday season and Happy New Year. It's January 1st, 2019 for us. So
yeah,
here we are.
Here we are.
Have a good one.
Happy New Year.